You buy a pair of socks, that's 2 socks. You buy a pair of Bombas socks, that's 4 socks. Because one purchased is one donated. Socks are the #1 most requested clothing item in homeless shelters. So when you buy a pair of super comfortable Bombas socks, you're also donating a pair. Bombas customers have powered over 150 million donations. So Bombas would like to thank you 150 million times. But we only have like 30 seconds. Go to bombas.com/listen and use code LISTEN for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/listen and use code LISTEN at checkout.
Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast, celebrating 10 years of podcasting.
There's gotta be a way of killing it. How? How do we do it?
You can't. Bullshit. You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism.
What's happening?
Something in the water.
What do you mean there's something in the water?
No, there's just something in the fucking water.
Pharaoh, do you copy?
Standing by.
Prep for dust off. We're gonna need immediate evac.
Roger. On our way.
Say we take off, nuke the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
Get away from her, you bitch!
I ain't much for begging. Nobody ever gave me nothing. So I say, fuck that thing. Let's fight it.
Welcome to Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast. I am your host, Jamie Prater, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Patrick Green.
How you doing, my friend?
I'm good. We got a real zinger tonight.
We do.
The
I'm so
internet's been
fucking
hopping.
excited about this. Yes.
I know. It's exciting times. And before we get to that, just a couple quick housekeeping things. We have some patrons. We'll go back to the beginning of April. We have El Miados, Callie Reed, Ivy, Laura, Alan Bartalik, Manu B, Joshua Robinson, Matt Benware, Wayland Yutani, Distinguished Engineer, AJ Baroob, and just last week, Mr. Planet Ekaz. If you want to join them, go to perfectorganism.com/support. We've got stuff coming out like crazy lately. And
we do.
Also,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say we might have a new audio drama coming out next year. Maybe.
Wow. Dropping some exclusives tonight. Look at that. Wow. Okay. That's exciting. It actually is. I've read it. It is very exciting. So also we have a review from Mr. Underwater Jaguar 855. I don't know if it's supposed to be Jaguar. It might be a typo. Regardless of whatever it is, Underwater Jaguar 855 says, I love this podcast and it's a best for any Alien fan. I hope they talk about other parts of the franchise, like the role-playing game by Free League. But either way, it's an amazing podcast. Well, Mr. Underwater Jaguar, we are returning to our Free League coverage because, of course, we just had a massive Kickstarter to talk about. But also, a very large contingent of the team is about to do another game in a few days with our good friend Amanda Fisher, who's a patron who has DM'd games in the past for us. She's amazing, and I don't think we're gonna record that one. Maybe we will. Who knows? But we're hoping to use that as a launch pad to do some larger RPG things and maybe involve some more of our patrons in it, which would be really cool. And also return to our friends at Free League and see how things are going and how things have changed since the inclusion of more of the lore from the RPG and other elements of the franchise. So. That's a very astute point, Mr. Underwater Jaguar. Thank you for mentioning it. And one more plug before I hand it over to Jamie to get our guest on. We have a subreddit now, which Holden started, and it's freaking awesome. I'm in there all the time. It's just r/perfect organism. And it is similar to Building Better Worlds, a really safe space for open alien discussion. And, we share some of the things that we post in there on our social media channels. So if you don't use Facebook, for example, or Instagram, you'll see a lot of what we do in there. But also, sometimes, I'll just go in there and pose a question to people and then pull some of that into episodes. So it's really fun. If, again, go to, it's reddit.com and it's, r/perfect organism. And hope to meet up with you in that space as well. And without further ado, back to Jamie to introduce our guest.
Yes, indeed. So joining us tonight, a surprise guest, Adam Zeller from the Alien vs. Predator podcast. Welcome to the show, Adam. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks again for having me, guys.
Of course. And tonight we are here to discuss essentially a possibility. For some, it might be a strong possibility, but it's definitely the idea that the next Alien film will feature a Predator. Before, at least for myself, before I feel like we get into that discussion, or I get into that discussion, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of history. Like, I remember when the first AVP film came out, I went to the theater and saw it. I actually enjoyed it for what it was. I really wanted to see what they were doing. And I thought, okay, interesting. This isn't really for me, but I thought it was a fun film. Thought it's a better film. It's a better Prometheus than Prometheus in some ways, because they share some very dynamic story beats. And then, of course, we had AVP Requiem, which was, I think all of us can agree that it was pretty bad. It was garbage.
Maybe not all of us.
But I also know that the AVP crossover started long before that in comic book form. I'm not aware of that. Patrick has informed me in the years that we've been friends and he's been on the show about the comics, and that they were actually really good. So I think I just wanted to preface, at least myself, that I'm not coming into this discussion with I fucking hate this. This is awful. I certainly have opinions, but I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is happening based on teases by both Dan and Fede. I mean, we have the first trailer for the upcoming Predator Badlands, which of course I'm very excited about, and we all spotted those alien elements in the trailer, the Weyland-Yutani Corp. So Alien is already kind of making its way into Predator. But yeah, the big question is out there, is Predator going to make its way into Alien? And yeah, there's a lot of differing opinions on this. I mean, me personally, I was into Alien first. And growing up young, I was into Alien through the toys. You know, I would see the Kenner toys at KB Toy Store and was like, what is this? These creatures are so crazy. And then I would see these Predators, and they sold the Predators as the ultimate alien hunter. I was like, wait, what is this? Is this related to Alien? Like, how do these fit together? So, and then I played the video games, and then my parents let me watch all the movies. And of course, I was into all of them. But I was definitely more into Alien first. And then Predator grew on me. And now for a long time, it's kind of been, I would say, an equal interest for me. I think both do different things very well. And I've always liked the crossover concept. Now, me personally, I did enjoy the two movies, AVP and AVPR. I know that's not, it's probably not the best argument for that coming back to the screen now, those movies, because a lot of people didn't like them. They didn't get great reviews. The first movie, I think, did all right in the box office, but the second one, both critically and I think at the box office, didn't do that well. But I think the concept is strong, and a lot of fans that would argue for that concept would point to some of the comics, some of the games, and some of the stories that are told there. They do go beyond just a monster mashup, I would say. I think the concept has more potential than maybe some would think initially. So I am all for it. Now, at the same time, I didn't like how jumbled everything got with Marvel, how every Marvel movie turned into an Avengers film, essentially. And I would never want that for Alien and Predator. I would want standalone stories to continue completely. But I'm very excited for a potential crossover myself.
It's interesting because I feel like depending on where I am in my life, I have different feelings about this. But similar to Adam, like when I first got into these, franchises, the toys were a major driver of that. And the comic books were sort of the next phase because I was obsessed with these toys. And, I saw Aliens and Alien, and then I was like, oh, there's, there must be more. And then I would go to the comic store with my cousins and I would see the comics, and, the original AVP Alien vs. Predator run was on the stands. And I was like, oh my God, this is so great. The art was so cool. The storytelling was so cool. And so I was really, very much into it. And then of course, as a child who grew up mostly in the 90s, the entertainment that we were getting was very AVP centric. Like, into the 90s and the 2000s, we had these incredible AVP games. I mean, the AVP that was on the Atari Jaguar, I have it right over there. It's like one of my favorite console games ever released. I played the shit out of that when it came out. So for me, these two franchises have always been very linked. And I would say, of course, like the original Predator is like one of my favorite movies. It's probably a top 20 movie for me, maybe top 30. Predator 2 is like incredibly nostalgic for me. But it wasn't until the first AVP film came out in 2004 where I started being like, wait a minute. And I think it's because it's something about that, which actually, to both of your points, I don't think it's that bad. Like it's actually grown on me a lot in the years. We did an episode, Adam. I don't know if you remember. We had this like sometimes this patron series that we call Shit Show, where we like kind of rip movies apart a little bit. And I think the first episode we ever did was the first AVP film, and it like fell apart because after a half hour of it, we were like, actually, this isn't that bad. And then we just kind of then we did a commentary track, and we were like, oh, there's like a lot of really good things in this film. So I think that's actually a relatively well made movie. But the reason I bring it up is because that was the first time where the concept really fell flat for me, and it led me to this place of like, why is that? And to me, I think it's because the philosophical things that underpin both of these franchises are really different from one another. And it works really well, I think, when it's in the context of like a video game, for example, where the core play mechanics are very different between species and where there's already this kind of implicit hunt going on where you're gaining points and you're killing and you're surviving, etc. But I think in the context of a movie, you start to see why they're very different from each other. And that is where I kind of start getting my like, caution up a little bit. That is to say, like, I think, AVP and AVP Requiem are both very different from the sort of Alien vs. Predator crossover content that we would get from people like Dan Trachtenberg and Fede Alvarez. Like, I don't think that we are in that phase of like just smash the toys together, really, at this point. But I do think having a Predator in an Alien film does something very specific that kind of bothers me a little bit. So we've talked about this a lot, Jamie. Like, the reason why I never call the alien a beast is because I feel like it kind of implies this predator prey kind of animal aspect. And I always hate when people try to show aliens like eating people because I'm always like, that doesn't feel right. Like that's not what they're doing. To me, Alien works best when it's very unclear exactly what its motivation is and how it's going to achieve that motivation. When there's this kind of mystery to it. Like why, like I really don't like that Ridley was trying to like show us that David created them. I'm really glad that now that never really happened. So we don't know exactly, how that continuity goes. I think Alien works best when it's kind of unclear what the stakes are. Whereas Predator, on the other hand, the best Predator stories are stories where the stakes are extraordinarily clear, I think. And, Killer of Killers, for example, right? The first story, The Shield, is a perfect example of that. Like that has extremely clear, unclouded storytelling stakes where it is, there is, one species versus another species. There is a clan versus a clan. There's a mother and her son versus this threat. It's like very, very clear guideposts. And then the fun of a Predator story is how the story impresses you with its complexity after the fact. Like how you set up this predator prey dynamic and then things happen that are interesting within that. Whereas Alien, I think, to me, feels best when it's very mysterious. So all that is to say, like, I'm not saying that obviously that this could not work, but I think for whatever reason that an Alien and a Predator movie, I'm like kind of more okay with, but a Predator and an Alien film, I think it just changes the stakes in a very direct way, and it makes it feel a little more literal than the kind of Alien storytelling that I personally am looking for.
First few things. I also really love the Predator films. I love the first one. They're a different kind of experience, to your point, Patrick, and to your point, Adam. Like these are very different films. These are at least the earlier ones are these very testosterone driven, action oriented. Let's kill them all, and then actually they start changing over time. And I've enjoyed almost every Predator film except for The Predator, which came out in what year? What was that?
2018, right?
2018. Okay. Which was just
that's a bag of shit.
Garbage.
Do you like the movie, Adam? Hang on. Do you like the movie?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. Yeah.
I went to the premiere for that movie, and yeah, I remember walking back to the hotel. I mean, it was my first premiere, so it was just a stressful experience trying to get it right, on the red carpet. And then I was like, I hope I at least like the movie. And sure enough, I didn't. I do think that was kind of a victim of studio meddling. Like I remember watching Shane Black's film before that, The Nice Guys, and really enjoying it and being hyped like, oh, is an action comedy going to work for Predator? Like this could be interesting. But I think at the end with the reshoots, it just really felt like that movie didn't know what it wanted to be and ultimately was the lowest point in the franchise for me. I think out of any Alien, Predator, AVP movie, I've probably watched that one the least.
I also enjoyed, I think it was called Predators with Adrian Brody. I mean, again, I'm not a connoisseur of the Predator IP, but I've enjoyed the films. But this exception would be Prey. I thought was exquisite, just an exquisite piece of filmmaking from start to finish, from the casting to the acting to the design to that score, which is lyrical and gorgeous and melodic. And I wish there was a score as good as that in the past few Alien films, because there hasn't been. Like, Dan Trachtenberg hit that film out of the park. Like, if that is the litmus test for Predator, then sign me up. But again, it's also still a Predator film. It's about a hunt, it's about survival, and there's sort of switching the lead. The lead's a woman now. Of course, it's in the hands of Disney, so it makes a little bit more sense. But it didn't matter in Prey. As long as you write a good character like Ripley, it doesn't matter if they're a man or a woman. It was just really, really great. Which brings me to a friend of ours, friend of the show, listener of the show, someone who also posted in our Building Better Worlds group, said, an alien, to Patrick's point, an alien in a Predator film enriches Predator. A Predator in an Alien film diminishes Alien. And I'm not going to come down on an opinion on that, but definitely that resonated with me. And I think before I even get into it, the question I have is why? Why are we doing this? If this happens, we don't know for sure. There are talks, there are rumblings. A friend of ours close to the show, someone who would know, hinted that it's possible that it won't be in there, but I guess we'll see. But why? Why are they doing this? And there's so many things at play here. Alien Romulus was a success. It was, a colossal success. It made over 4 times its budget. It did really, really great. So there's this high that everyone's on. Of course, we have Prey, which also was a rip-roaring success. So you have these 2 directors coming off these really successful films that everyone's excited about. And I think what happens is an echo chamber starts where people sit in the room and it's just this echo chamber. Every idea is this great idea. Every idea is this great idea. And I think Alien is just getting its footing. Romulus, while it was successful, wildly successful, and it got Alien back on track, it was still this greatest hits Alien film. It really doesn't, it has its own agency in some ways, but it really doesn't have its own agency. And for me, I actually all for an Alien versus Predator film, or a Predator or Dan Trachtenberg doing a film with an alien in it. Absolutely. I just don't think the Alien IP needs a Predator. And for me, and if someone can answer this, that's fine. Not even you guys here, but just in the coming weeks or whatever. That question, why? Why are we bringing a Predator into this? And if you are bringing a Predator into the Alien series, what does that say about what you think about this series? That it can't stand on its own anymore, that it needs other things. And I really believe, and I don't know, of course, the inner workings of 20th Century. I don't think any of us do, even though we might have friends or people that we know who work within that system. We don't fully understand what's going on especially as it relates to these 2 properties. But I think that both properties, but more specifically Alien, could use a consultant, could use someone who is asking these questions. That's not a part of the echo chamber of every idea that we're hearing from these very successful directors right now is this great idea and let's go for it. The evidence I have is something that's different but similar. The Kong versus Godzilla. 2 really strong properties, I guess. They've been successful. They've had success and they've crossed them. And the first one was all right and it's just tanked it. That's where these have all gone. But I'll leave it with this. This crossing of IPs or whatever you want to call it, or properties, does not end well. It never ends well. And I just think that it's too soon for that. And again, if they want to do a separate film with a separate timeline, all for it. But right now, I just think Alien needs another film where it's not calling back to everything that's gone before, that's something it's more itself, something that can create better characters, and something that can live on its own a little bit longer before it starts, for lack of better terms, being diluted by something else because we don't think that the alien's good enough.
So here's a question for you really quickly, I guess for both of you. So you guys are okay with the concept of an AVP movie. You're just apprehensive with Predator appearing in an Alien film. But an AVP movie, you're all right with.
Yes and no. So to me, there's always been this nice benefit of having the AVP films be considered outside canon, right? In terms of like the Hollywood film canon. If it like somehow would make sense to have a separate continuity where there's AVP stuff going on, I'm more comfortable with that. The problem I think is once you like open that box up and you have aliens and predators in each other's movies and they are considered like mainstream Hollywood canon, there's a lot of like implications, to that, I think, for the universe that make me feel kind of like a little queasy.
Jamie, how about you? A standalone? Are you kind of in alignment with Patrick on that? Like standalone?
Yeah, I
movie?
mean, I guess I'm in alignment, but I'm hardlined in terms of do what you want to do, but well, when you cross these things, and again, the only films that we have right now to go on are the AVP and the AVP Requiem films. And what happened with those? Both properties were diminished by these things. It just lessened the impact of the alien, and it turned these very iconic things, like these movies, these alien films aren't really about the alien. The alien is present. These movies are about ourselves. And when you pit them against a predator and you make a film, it becomes sport. It becomes who's going to win, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. Yeah, kill them all. Fuck yeah. Like it turns into this machine that is not the alien films. Yeah. But at the same time, if they want to do that, yeah, I'm fine with that. As long as it does, as long as it has its own continuity and they do their own thing, absolutely fine with it.
It's interesting you bring up Godzilla and Kong. This was actually something I was going to mention because our mutual friend Mike, I saw he posted on, you guys did some social media post asking what people thought about this concept. And he brought up the point that these MonsterVerse films, I mean, say what you will about them, they've been wildly successful. I'm not a big fan. I think they get a little silly, and I personally think the AVP concept could be elevated, to a different level than those films. But those films do really well. And those films did not diminish, I think, the Toho films that are still very critically acclaimed, like the recent Godzilla -1. So I don't think if they made an AVP, it would diminish Alien, especially if it was like standalone, its own thing. I don't know if AVP 1 and 2 were considered outside of canon until Prometheus kind of changed the whole thing with Peter Wayland and Charles Bishop Wayland and all that.
That's how I've always understood, was the moment where it was shifted to officially not being canon.
Yeah. And Alien almost shifted its own canon with Alien 5. It got very close to that. And Predator in the past with The Predator got close to incorporating elements of Alien with those wild endings they shot with Ripley and Newt showing up out of nowhere, an adult Newt.
Oh my God, I blocked that out.
That it really, I think, depends on how it's done. Because if that would have happened in The Predator, I wouldn't have been like, oh shoot, they're crossing over. I'd be like, that's a terrible idea. I don't like this. Because like it's so far-fetched and crazy, So if it was to happen now, and to some extent you have to just recognize that Disney's done this with Marvel, and they do want a franchise. They do want to make money. At the end of the day, yeah, filmmakers care about their art. They care about telling stories and having solid characters, but studios see potential in this, and that's a reality. That doesn't mean I feel like AVP is always going to be diminished. Yes, the films, while the first film I think had some really great artistry in terms of conceptual design, production design, yeah, the stories were not as good as they could have been, I feel like. Especially with the second one. I like the second one for different qualities, for its kind of grindhousey nature, the fact that it's in Colorado and I live in Utah, so it's kind of relatable to me, even just on an environmental level. But I fully admit most people hated that movie, right? And I feel like if they were to do a new AVP, it would not take those first two films into account at all. But there are some comics, among my favorites, AVP Eternal, AVP Thicker Than Blood, which are really character-focused, human character-focused, and tell really great stories. Even the second game by Monolith, AVP 2, I would say has the most solid AVP story out of any of the games. In that game, it really felt like it was an Aliens setting that just had some predators there. It almost felt like an Aliens story with just predators involved. And you had some really interesting insights into the space jockeys before their kind of Prometheus interpretation in that game. So for me, they've never really detracted from each other. Like I know there was this debate on Twitter a while back that is Predator horror. And I think absolutely. I mean, both Aliens and Predator were real genre benders. And that was part of their appeal. Is you think Predator is going to be this gung-ho action film, but then it changes into this horror film where they get picked off one by one. And Aliens, it's kind of similar with that. A lot of people say Aliens is the action one, but no, I mean Aliens has a very unique blend of action and horror. So would I want the Predator to come in and steal the show in an Alien movie? No. But am I opposed to a Predator appearance, if done well, if done right, to set something up in the future? Yeah, I'm all for it.
I think there's a difference there. To your point, that recent Godzilla film, what's it called? Godzilla minus one. Yeah. I saw it in the theater. I saw it twice. The last time was in England. Fucking amazing. Just amazing. The Godzilla versus Kong film, or shows, or whatever you want to call them, films, whatever they are right now, they diminish themselves in those shows because they're poorly written and they become mainstays. But did it diminish minus one? Not at all. Because do you know why? Because minus one treated Godzilla the way the Japanese meant it to be treated, as a stand-in for something else. Yes, there's this creature in the water, or this big, huge monster, but this was something that came out of the devastating bombing of Hiroshima. This was a way for part of their culture to address that in some really fundamental, beautiful, passionate ways. In that film, in minus one, they achieved that. And also minus one was shot for essentially relatively next to nothing compared to Hollywood budgets. I mean, it was just simply amazing. And so they're using this monster as this mirror for themselves, and in a very layered way. Whereas if you go to the American side, it's turned into spectacle. These things are spectacle. It's about fights. It's about blows. It's about set pieces and this and that. So I think, and hey, if the next one worked, that's great, I guess. If you only had that to go on, it's just like it's a carnival ride. It's like, okay, that's interesting. What's for dinner? You know. Whereas with minus one, you watch it and you're like, can we talk about this? How is this affecting you? Do you want to see it again? All of those things that really great films do. And I feel like, and I'm not saying that a Predator and an Alien film is just going to make it shit or whatever. I'm not saying that at all. But again, I think America is so hung up on commerce. The industry is so, of course it's a business. So they're going to be driven by the financials. They're going to be driven by the bottom dollar. And when something works, the studio wants to do it again and again and again. And I'll die on a hill saying this. Alien is not Marvel. Alien doesn't need a connected world. In fact, when there was the roll-up to when Romulus was still in production, there was talk that the production of Romulus tried to speak to the people working on Alien Earth, and the people on Alien Earth didn't respond. And I think that was for the best. Everything doesn't need to be connected. But I also understand we have a studio that wants an IP that's alive and well. They want an IP that people are excited about. And because the studio can live in a vacuum, and those executives and a lot of people involved, not everyone, not all the time, but they can live in a vacuum where they're surrounded by the goodness of their own words and how everything is great and every idea is great. They don't fully hear or listen to the idea that not everything is needed. And I think, again, I'll pivot back to my earlier statement. It's just too soon for this. It's too soon. Give Rain and Andy a movie where what if they end up, instead of on Ivaga, they end up on the planet that Daniels and Tennessee end up on? Yeah, like what if that's the planet they end up on? What if they crash land there or whatever, or the ship, the Corbalon, ends up there and they think they're somewhere else, but they're on that planet, and they find Daniels and Tennessee and whatever, and that's a whole film. That would be really, really interesting. There's so much there. There's so much there in terms of what they could do with body horror, how they could really push the envelope in terms of the alien's life cycle and how things change and how it's born, and what that goo can do and the terror behind that, instead of just opting for, well, let's just go with a Predator. I'm not even saying, I don't know. We don't know what they're saying, honestly. We're just hearing bits and pieces that there might be a Predator involved. But I think that there's so much in the alien world, the alien universe, that has been untouched, that has not been seen, that we can wait on a Predator. And again, do another film. Let Dan do it. Let Dan Trachtenberg have aliens in his film, and let him do it. I think all of this passion that you're hearing is coming from someone who has felt, as a child, felt saved by these films, felt saved by the characters in these films. They, wrote scripts by hand as a teenager, loving these things, doing a podcast with Patrick for 10 years. So there's a real sense of ownership here. And it feels like when I hear news bits like this, that it's being pulled away, like it's being pulled away for the sake of commerce and popularity, as opposed to telling really good stories. And as much as I really loved so much of Romulus, for me, at the end of the day, it lacks its own agency. And I really want Fede to make a film, an alien film, a solid alien film with agency, before everyone turns into Marvel and it's like, oh, it's a carnival ride now. What are we seeing next? What's this shot? What's in here?
If there was a new AVP, I would not want it to be a carnival ride. Now, some of the spectacle is these monsters fighting, for sure. People do want to see that. I would argue that both franchises have had some time to themselves. I mean, the last EVP movie we got was 2007 at this point, so it's been 18 years since since the last AVP film. And just looking on my bookshelf, like the vast majority of comics and novels are aliens. There's a number of Predator ones, and there are very, very few AVP ones, actually. But honestly, I feel like some of the strongest stories have been AVP ones. Like that first Dark Horse comic was one of their best performing at the time, and it had a great character-driven story. Yes, the monster fights are part of it. People want to see those. And again, circling back to Godzilla, like the director of -1 had praise for Godzilla X Kong. And I mean, you could chalk that up to studio politics, I guess. But, and again, I'm no fan of the MonsterVerse films. I don't think those should be an ideal that an AVP film should strive for. If anything, I would say the strongest crossover movie I've ever seen is Freddy vs. Jason, which is just so kick-ass. I don't know if you guys have seen that one. And this is something I had also mentioned to you a while back, Jamie, is that to me, the original Alien was described by Ridley Scott as Texas Chainsaw Massacre in space. And it was kind of this B movie done in a really A way, I would say. And I feel to some extent Alien has maybe had a bit too much of like film theory insight into it. And I think that documentary, or I guess film essay, Memory, the Origins of Alien, which I enjoyed, it did get a few eye rolls from me, I would say, with some of how deep they were looking into Alien. And that's fine. Like, we can interpret films in different ways. That doesn't mean that was their initial intention. Now, Scott did try and get a bit more heady with Prometheus and Covenant, I thought, to varying degrees of success. Predator, on the opposite side of things, is maybe not given enough credit to, in my opinion. There was a book called, it was by Ander Monson, and it was called Predator, a Memoir, a Movie, an Obsession. And I think he talked about watching the movie 146 times and everything he got out of that. And it was very interesting. I've seen a film theory essay as Predator, like compared to the AIDS crisis, and it was a really interesting essay. I don't think that was John McTiernan's intention, but it was still a really interesting insight into that film. I feel like Alien is maybe, it can be highbrow. H.R. Giger is highbrow, of course. Like there's a lot of depth there. Alien has that. I think Predator has that in other ways. And AVP doesn't need to be that, but at the same time, I think it should be above what those first two movies were. I don't want Alien to be Marvel. I don't want Predator to be Marvel. So I think if they do this, they have to do it right. But, I mean, Dan and Fede, they're friends. They both seem excited by this concept. So I'm like, sure, guys, go for it. I mean, let's see what happens. If anything, I think the sequels of Alien and Predator did more damage to those franchises than AVP could ever do at this point. And we've survived, right? They're still making these movies. Yeah, I mean, I fully understand your apprehension, especially with a property like Alien. Alien is more established, I would say. But that's kind of been changing. I mean, after we get Badlands, both franchises will have 7 films. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to muddy the waters too much. I don't want to expect a Predator in every upcoming Alien project. I don't want to see an alien in every upcoming Predator project. And if they do have that crossover building up to a standalone thing, I just think they should still have focus on their own story. So I'm totally with you on that. I don't want to take away from Alien by thrusting a Predator and everything when it doesn't need to be there. But I'm not fully opposed to the concept either. For me, it really is depending on how it's done. It could be done well, and it could be done not so well.
We're going to take a break and be right back. This episode is brought to you by FX's Alien Earth. From creator Noah Hawley and executive producer Ridley Scott, FX's Alien Earth is the first television series inspired by the legendary Alien franchise, and I could not be more excited as a lifelong Alien fan. And the setup for this is a mysterious deep space research vessel, the USCSS Maginot, crash lands on Earth, and Wendy, played by Sydney Chandler, and a group of tactical soldiers make a fateful discovery that puts them face to face with the planet's greatest threat in FX's Alien Earth. And one of those, of course, we believe will be, and have seen it in trailers, is the xenomorph or the XX-121.
Yes, but we know there's also at least 4 other organisms that we haven't seen before, and we have no idea what those are. I can't wait to see what they do with that. And speaking of expanding on things, in the past, we've, of course, had Weyland-Yutani, we've had Seegson. Now we have an Earth that is governed by 5 corporations. We have Prodigy, Wayu, Lynch, Dynamic, and Threshold. We have cyborgs, which are humans with biological and artificial parts. We have synthetics, which we know and love, which are humanoid robots with artificial intelligence. And now, for the first time, we have hybrids, which are humanoid robots infused with human consciousness. And Wendy, again played by Sydney Chandler, is the first prototype of this new hybrid, and she marks a new dawn in this race for immortality.
FX's Alien Earth premieres August 12th on FX and Hulu.
You bring up an interesting point about the fact that Predator is kind of shifting higher brow lately, because if you look at, for example, critic scores on recent Predator films versus recent Alien films, Predator is doing better in that regard, right? I mean, Prey was universally acclaimed, and Killer Killers is like almost 100% on Rotten Tomatoes right now. So like there's definitely, I think, a shifting public perception a little bit of what Predator maybe could be. To go back to a few things that have come up. So, the original Predator film, we did a frame rate on that a long time ago. And it was one of my favorite episodes of Frame Rate, because we all went into it expecting, because we all saw it a million times growing up, and then took a while away from it, expecting it to be this, very macho kind of slug it out, 80s action fest. And really found tremendous, like very almost confusing levels of depth in it, in terms of like subversion of, male archetypes, especially in cinema at the time. Like there's something really kind of interestingly subversive about that film, in terms of like, what was happening in Hollywood films at the time, and this sort of vaunting of action stars, etc. So like, I definitely think Predator has had moments of real complexity that have held up really well. And going back to the idea of, Godzilla, X Kong, etc. Like obviously Godzilla X Kong is a terrible movie. Saw it in theaters, whatever. I'm a Godzilla slut. I'll go to any Godzilla thing that comes out. But, it's a bad movie. But it also, there's plenty of precedent for it, because in much of Godzilla's history, he's battled fucking smog monsters, and just the ridiculous revolving, he's teamed up with King Kong in the past. He's fought King Kong in the past, and the scripts to those movies are worse than Godzilla X Kong. I mean, at least Godzilla X Kong tries to make some sort of sense. A lot of, Godzilla's most enjoyable films from the 60s and 70s are just complete like peyote induced, crazy, action sequences. It's funny because we don't really like hold those films to the standard of a film like -1, which is such a masterpiece, but like they do kind of count, quote unquote, as Godzilla movies. And so that gets me to this other thought, which is like, why do we as audiences allow both the Toho Godzilla and the, legendary Godzilla to exist at the same time in such wildly different types of films? And I really think it's because, I mean, for one thing, they are clearly existing in different continuities, and both production houses have been very clear about that. These are not the same stories. In fact, -1 is, of course, a direct sequel to the original film. So, like, that is a very established thing, right? And the Legendary Pictures, they started in 2014 with their own continuity, and that has been more or less through King of the Monsters, et cetera, unchanged. And now these Godzilla X Kong things have their own semi-separate continuity that's in the Monarch universe. And it's we as audiences are kind of ready for that. Also, the monsters look very different, right? They behave very differently. I mean, there's no, better indication of that than the fact that as the legendary, films started coming out, we had this, shift to these very horror-driven Japanese Godzilla films. Before -1, of course, we had Shin Godzilla, which is like as wildly different from the legendary stories you can get. It's a very self-contained, very horrifying, very body horror story. And as audiences, we kind of accept it because there's this idea that Godzilla is more of it's a conceptual framework onto which you can make a story, but it doesn't have to be this completely self-contained, Ark of the Covenant kind of a continuity. Alien is wrestling with this a lot right now, and we are wrestling with this a lot as a podcast in our chat messages all the time. This is something that's it's intense because, especially with the RPG coming out now, we really have a very bulletproof, codified sense of this happened and then this happened and then this happened. This is the date at which, this happens. This is when the merger of Weyland and Yutani happened, and that's why this logo appears here, and that's why this star chart makes sense, because this is the type of Hyperdyne technology that all of these things are very mapped out now. Now we have Alien Earth coming out, and we have somebody making it who says things like, I wanted to exist, quote unquote, outside of continuity, which it could mean anything. I mean, we don't know, and we know it takes place 2 years before the events of Alien, supposedly, but like a lot of stuff happens in Alien Earth that doesn't seem to be acknowledged in any of the coming Alien films that happen after it, right? And I've thought this through a lot, because I'm like, all right, so it happens in 2120, Alien is in 2122. The Nostromo crew would have been in hypersleep, and I was trying to make it work that they had somehow been knocked out for 2 years, but it doesn't make sense with how far away they were traveling to in Zeta Reticuli. So it would have been like a few months at the max. So like they had to have known about what supposedly had happened on Earth to some degree. Like they were getting messages, and then you could say, well, maybe Mother was intercepting them and the company was obfuscating what was really going on. Like there's always ways of kind of making it work. But my point being, it feels to me from the outside that we're kind of entering this bifurcated area for Alien, which is going to be really challenging for audiences, especially Alien audiences who do not like that. But it could potentially open things up, which I know is something that I think Jamie has even mentioned before might be kind of nice if we stop being so, religious about this has to happen here and this has to happen here and this has to affect this. A great example of when it works well to me is Dark Horse, which is going to come up a lot in this conversation, I think, and continue to, because of course that's where we got AVP from, right? The original story came out in 89. The original comics came out shortly thereafter that, and then it really became like an amazing anthology style storytelling experiment, right? We had things like Renegade leading to Deadliest of the Species. When that came out, that was a big deal in comics. Deadliest of the Species was like on every single comic store you went to, people were talking about it. There were all of these, that story continuities from that ended up coming out. There were things coming out at the same time that were totally separate Alien and Predator and Alien vs. Predator stories, where different artists were treating the physiology of these creatures completely differently, just wildly creative and nuts, And I think at the time, people probably were like, what the hell's going on with the continuity of these things? Like, how is this all happening? But now we look back on it as this like halcyon era where creative liberties were taken and people could take experiments. And I have always, at least since Romulus came out, had this sense and been kind of internally campaigning for this idea that we can kind of have a film continuity, which will make money for the franchise, where we can have, Fede do his thing, where it might be a little bit kind of greatest hits, but people enjoy it and it makes money. And then we can have spaces for more auteur-driven projects, like what I'm assuming Hawley's project will end up being, but also for things like Killer of Killers, right? For Predator. Like I think having a treatment of that for Alien would be amazing. And I would even love to see a treatment of that for AVP. Of course, there are unreleased AVP animated projects, which who knows how good those are at this point. But, I think it would be very cool to have anthology style storytelling where we allow these, more mature stories to happen in kind of a self-contained way. But I think the second you put a Predator in a mainstream Hollywood movie, that's kind of it. Like, because at that point, in terms of the public's perception of these films, like they are forever just in the same universe. And right now it's weird because like, I'm sure, Adam, you probably get, obviously you get a lot more of these messages than either of us do, but like whenever a Predator anything comes out, whether it's like a NECA figurine or an announcement of a movie, I get flooded with texts from people like, and people I go bike riding with. They're like, "Oh, did you see the new trailer for Predator? For Prey coming out?" And it's funny because I'm not a Predator fan. Like I love Predator, but I'm not like an aficionado of it, you know. But everybody, because I'm an Alien guy, assumes that I also have to be a Predator person, and that's just sort of in terms of public perception, I think where people are at. And so to me, if you put a Predator in a mainstream Hollywood movie, that's everybody's like, okay, these are just the same. This is a shared universe. They're together forever. But having an anthology could be a cool way around that.
Well, I think to your point, I mean, people are asking you that because I think in the minds of a lot of people who aren't as hardcore fans as us, they are linked to some extent, even if it's from movies in the past. And speaking of an Alien anthology, I don't know if you guys have read Alien Black, White, and Blood, but that is an anthology story.
Yeah, we love.
Yeah, we've covered it,
especially the UPP
Patreon
story is like one of the best things I've seen in modern Alien. Yeah,
yeah, that Utopia one was really cool. So I think anthology could work with Alien as well. But yeah, that last comic, Dark Horse went out swinging with AVP, Thicker Than Blood. If there's any story you guys haven't read that's AVP that I would recommend, it's that one, followed by Eternal. But it's funny because speaking to the comics, Marvel has not seen a new AVP yet. It's been all these crossovers with superheroes. And so it feels to me like they're really coordinating this. Like they want AVP, if it is going to come back, it's going to be in coordination with comics and games. So yeah, part of this is just franchising for sure. But again, back to Alien 5, like I was excited for it to finally smash canon, for better or worse, because I was so frustrated with Prometheus and Covenant. And I don't think they'll smash canon now. I think they want to keep things coordinated, but again, to Alien Earth, who knows? They could still be telling stories that are outside of what Fede and Dan are going to be doing, assuming they do collaborate in the future. It's also funny to me because Ridley Scott did Prometheus and wasn't a fan of AVP, but the first major media project we got post Prometheus was this huge comic crossover, just enormous comic crossover with Alien, Predator, Prometheus, and AVP, which was just wild.
That is a batshit crazy story.
Definitely recommend going back and reading that one. I need to do it myself. So I understand the apprehension, but I feel if you were to just ask regular moviegoers who like Prey or Predator and who liked Romulus, hey, do you want to see a new AVP? They'd probably be like, hell yeah, that sounds cool, you know? And you have to, like, I guess, balance our fan expectations with audience expectations. And that's a tricky thing to do. I think Prey really balanced being accessible to newcomers while also pleasing hardcore fans. With Killer of Killers, I had some criticisms of that from the perspective of a fan, but it seems like most audiences and critics are loving it, you know? So yeah, I have seen in the past where an alien has shown up in a Predator story, like Predator Concrete Jungle, or vice versa. And there have been times where it felt like it didn't work. But other times where it did. Like there was a Dark Horse series, which was the 3 World War arc. That was all right. I just feel like with the films, like we haven't really had AVP anything for a while. The last one, I think, the last piece of media was a book called Rift War. And before that, there was an anthology book called Ultimate Prey, which I consulted on. And that one had some really interesting stories from a diverse array of authors and told some very uncommon stories in the AVP universe. It was hit and miss, in my opinion. But yeah, it is a really interesting time. I mean, we are eating good these days, especially if you're a fan of both properties. So I fully understand like the viewpoint of Alien fans that may be feeling a little cautious as to a Predator making an appearance here. I think Fede and Dan wouldn't want to compromise those own franchises, even if they are building up to something else. They're both talented filmmakers, and they seem to get on with each other. So for me personally, I'm just excited for more AVP, be it like its own thing or a slow build-up, because it's just been so long for me, and that was one of the core things that really brought me into it. I mean, there was a time when we were thinking of changing the name for our site to Alien and Predator Galaxy, because we didn't think we'd get another AVP ever again at a certain point. And now seeing all this talk from Steve Aspel and Fede and Dan, it is just a really exciting time for a real buildup for that, because the first AVP happened after Resurrection, after the Alien franchise was kind of considered dead, you know? So yes, the AVP films, the second one didn't perform very well. The first one did. But I think you have to credit it a little bit for being one of the first like pulsing alien back to life before Prometheus happened, regardless of how bad AVPR was, right? In most people's eyes. And same thing with Prometheus and Covenant. I might have my criticisms of those. We wouldn't have the Alien franchise where it is now without those, even with the performance of Covenant. Whatever ends up happening, I don't want it to be Marvel. I don't want it to be done haphazardly, but it is certainly an exciting prospect for me.
I think what's important for me is, number one, on both of our shows, we are friendly with the directors. You guys have had Dan on your show a couple of times. We've had Fede on our show a couple of times. These are marvelous, kind, loving, smart, intelligent people. And I don't want to come off as a gatekeeper at all. Certainly, I hold Alien very close to me. It's an integral part of who I am. It's an integral part of my psychology in its own way. And I know that years of these people's lives go into writing and directing and all of the stuff that it takes to get these things on screen. Making films, making TV shows is so difficult. People don't understand how difficult it is. And to have something that you've made that's been difficult, that's successful, that's even harder. And they've done it. They've achieved that. So I always want to balance my passion, my passionate opinions for things, knowing that I'm also talking about the humans and the humanity involved in getting these things on our screens. I will never say enough about what it takes and the work that it takes and the hours that these people spend away from their families, away from their homes in other states or in other countries, making these things to bring us joy, because that's really what they want to do at the end of the day. They want to bring us joy. I fully recognize that. One of my apprehensions about the sequel to Alien Romulus having a Predator in it is, number one, Alien Romulus was filled with so many callbacks, so much dialogue that was lifted from other films that, again, it just really didn't have its own, towards the end of it at least, it didn't really have its own agency. And then you had Rain, who essentially did everything that Ripley did in Alien and Aliens, even doing her final speech like Ripley did, and putting her hand on her chest like Ripley did, and they fade into a planet like Ripley did. And so by that, I was so concerned. There were so many callbacks that I felt like, what's going on here? Like, is this what they thought people wanted to see? And again, I also have to weigh that it doesn't even matter what I think or my criticism. It was a successful film. So they're going to want more of the same because that worked. That's what the system does. Something works, a way of making something work. They're like, hey, yeah, give us more. Give us more. I want to make sure, and I can only be a voice on a show like both of you, but I really want to make sure that they treat both properties, because I also think Predator or Prey was elevated. It wasn't just telling the story of a predator hunting indigenous people in America. It was telling a deeper story. I mean, at that time, things were happening with the indigenous population in this country where they were being hunted and they were being forced out of their lands. And I think that film really operated on that level in some ways, the way that Godzilla works for the Japanese and helping them tell their stories. I really feel like Dan elevated Predator to something no one ever thought possible. It was a really wonderfully told story that wasn't just about a predator hunting a young woman or a predator hunting a group of indigenous people. It was something more. It was, these people are being hunted from their lands and these lands are being taken. And maybe that's what the Predator was doing in its own way. Maybe that's the story Dan was telling using the Predator. I don't really know, but that's what I get from it. And I cannot go on enough about how amazing that film is. Knowing that there's such greatness there, that they achieved such greatness, where Dan achieved such greatness. I don't feel the same about Romulus. I don't think Romulus achieved the kind of greatness that Prey did. I think Prey is actually a better film. But they're also very different worlds. I don't want to sit here and compare them because I don't like the comparison game. But I do think on its face, Prey is a better film than Romulus. And I part of me feels the Alien that I've always wanted. And I'm not talking, I want Ripley back. I want you to do the next film like you did like they did the original films. I want a really intelligent, authentic, genuine story that's not reliant on any other things to be told before it's pulled from me. I'm reacting, feeling like this is being pulled from me now. And as we approach Alien Earth, I'm really excited because I do think we're going to see an auteur tell a story in this universe in his own way. To your point, I don't really care about canon. I don't really care about timelines. I want a good story and good characters. That's it. And if you can achieve that, I don't care where it's set. I really, really don't. So I'm looking forward to Alien Earth, knowing that it's someone who really knows why Alien was successful in the beginning, but also Alien Earth is going to be sharing new creatures with us. I'm all for that. I'm all for, let's do something new. What else can we do? What else is in this world? What else can we bring into the alien world that can scare people, that can change the story a little bit? I harped on Predator a little bit in these films, even Prey, like I said, it's like the hunter and the hunted. And that's what these films have sort of been since their beginning. And that's fine. That's what they are. On its face, it feels a little lowbrow to me. Not to say that it is, but it's like, okay, it's fine. I saw Killer of Killers. I really enjoyed it, except for the last 20 minutes. I thought it was ridiculous. But I really enjoyed it. But again, it was, hunter, hunting, hunted, hunter, hunting, world. I was like, okay, it's just the same thing again. And these the three vignettes in the beginning, and they were the same thing 3 times. The Predator out, and then, they killed them, and then they take them, and they're on the ship. But I still found it enjoyable. But I want to get, at least with Alien, I want to get beyond this. We're on a ship. You got to get to here from here. There's an alien after you who's been face hugged. I want to get beyond that before we get into this thing that once it starts, it won't stop anymore. And I don't know if that's a possibility unless Hawley continues doing what he's doing. And if it's successful, he's going to keep, I think they're talking about up to 3 seasons, which is great. It's probably the next 8 years of our lives. But I really what you're hearing, and I think I'll just sort of leave it here from me, is I'm just concerned. I'm concerned that the Alien film that we just got, however appreciative I am that it has made the IP successful, is going off into this direction where we will not recognize these films.
Just also a brief shout out that Fede was also on the AVP Galaxy podcast, I believe, back in November of 2024. So you can also hear his interview with them too. And it'd be fun to get Dan Trachtenberg on Perfect Organism, talk through. That'd be a cool conversation, don't you think?
Yeah, I would love to listen to that one.
That'd be really interesting. Yeah. No, I definitely hear you, Jamie. And I'm very much philosophically aligned with you on this matter. But I try to remind myself that this franchise means a lot of things to a lot of people, and that we are a very small, very passionate subset of those people. And I think so the degree of quote unquote ownership we have of it is something that we feel very strongly in our hearts, because it's a major, it's one of the governing things that I live my life by, is these stupid movies that I love so much. I can admit that. But there's a lot of people who just want to see a good story. And I think it's hard because when you love something a lot, it can feel very uncomfortable when people take risks with it. I have long been saying now for the 6 years that we've been waiting for Alien Earth to come out, that this is going to be a challenging thing for audiences, because I think the people that we interact with all the time are going to be receptive to it, because we're all very passionate, nerdy, informed fans of this stuff who are completely up to date and, very lore heavy, and we really know what's coming, and we're really excited, and we want to be, confused and surprised. We want to expand our horizons of what alien storytelling can be. But it's a mistake to think that even 1/1000th of 1% of humanity is like that. I mean, nobody that we run into in our daily lives just out in the street is anything like we are. That's just the truth. So it's something that I have to remind myself of. And Fede has talked about this, when he's been on our show before a couple of times, when you love something a lot, it's easy to have reactions like this to it because we feel very protective of it. That being said, I said earlier to you, Jamie, that having a Predator in a mainstream Hollywood movie is a red line for me, and I kind of honestly stand by that. I would love to be completely surprised and to have this somehow be incredible, and then I would love to, eat my shoes and say I was wrong about it. But is that an expression? That's an expression, right? Eat my shoes. Do people say? Yeah, people say
or
that.
Eat my hat. I don't know.
Eat my hat, it's hat. I knew it was slightly raw off. Anyway, I'll eat whatever. But that being said, I really hope it doesn't happen. And I don't think that we're getting there with a Romulus 2, by the way. What's interesting though is in Badlands in the trailer, it is like so clear that that alien exists in that continuity. Like that is not confusable. And when you think about it, like that's not like just footage from the show. That is the original theatrical trailer that was released. So that was very intentional that they are signaling that at least in terms of Predator, that these things coexist now in that continuity. We don't have that for Aliens. So we don't know. We just hear rumblings of things. We hear people talking. Maybe we're totally having this conversation and it's not even necessary because it's not even true. I think, though, that Disney, knowing how Disney operates, will eventually, to Adam's point, want to do something to combine these together to make money. That being said, so Disney is in a tremendously difficult financial spot at the moment. There's been quite a lot of layoffs. They've had some massive flops lately. They've had a couple, back-to-back biggest flops of their entire company's history with Wish and Snow White. So Disney's kind of hurting for cash at the moment. We don't have numbers for Alien Earth's production budget, but I'm assuming it's a lot. It hasn't been released anywhere that I found, but that is an expensive show. If that expensive show does not get the casual Joe Schmo viewer that we're bumping into in the street every day to watch it, Disney's not going to keep going with that. What they will keep going with are the things that make money, In Romulus, which again, to qualify, I think I like more than you do, Jamie. I really do love Romulus, regardless of complaints that I have about it. It made 4.5 times its budget, and it's a rated R movie in a year that was crowded with rated R movies, and it made a shit ton, especially internationally. It made almost $300 million internationally, $240 million. That's crazy. That is about an $80 million production budget. Very, very big deal. So Disney sees that, and they're like, that's what people are showing up for, right? And in addition to that, it was by and large critically acclaimed. People really enjoyed it just in general in the public. So, that's kind of the way the market functions. And unfortunately, when these things that we love make $350 million, the market speaks pretty loudly. That being said, Romulus is not an AVP movie. I don't want to get that confused. We're not saying that it's an AVP film, but it is definitely a film that is comfortable for people. And this is no more evident than the thing that pissed me off so much the first viewing. The reason why that initial review was so negative that we put out that night in the middle of the night in this room that I'm in right now was specifically get away from her, you bitch. I was like, that is a red line for me too. That was something that was just inexcusable to me. That was such a direct callback that kneecapped Ripley's moment in Aliens. And I was so mad about it that it ruined the movie. And I walked out of that thinking that's a 2 out of 10 film. I was so pissed. And then we saw it again, and the audience was much more into it. And I started noticing all the things that I loved about it. And then I got to say, I saw it 4 more times in theaters, and all 4 of the rest of the times that I saw it, people clapped on that line. Specifically, people fucking, how many people called me and texted me saying, can you believe it? They actually did a Ripley callback. And I was like, I hate that. I'm happy you liked it, I guess. But that's the thing, is what we want is not indicative of what most people want, And what the crazy thing to me is it seems to not be indicative of what a lot of the people making these things want either. Because Fede, when he's been on our show, has talked about the Force Awakens treatment and how he really loves what the Force Awakens did for Star Wars. And we're sitting there like, what? What are you talking about?
Look how that turned out. Look how that turned out.
Yeah. Right.
I think that's a terrible comparison, or it's an error to compare it. But at the same time, The Force Awakens was, the biggest money-making domestic film of all time.
It literally was one of the top-earning domestic grossing movies ever made in Hollywood history.
But interestingly enough, it didn't matter. It didn't matter because sentiment grew so terrible on those films and its sequels that it was the snowball effect. So it didn't matter. And I think my fear is that, and again, money talks. Money is the loudest talker. It's the loudest talker in any room that you're going to go in. Money, money, money. So if something makes money, it doesn't matter how critical you are of what that thing might have been, it made money, and that's what people are going to hear. It's going to drown out your criticism. It's going to drown out your everything. And I get it from a business standpoint. And I think I realized that the first 3 Alien films are works of art, even as controversial as Alien 3 is. And I recognize the flaws in Alien 3, even though it's a masterpiece in my mind. I still see some fairly major flaws in it. These were works of art. And what's happening is, and I even think Prometheus, for all of its warts, and it's a film I can't watch very much. And if I do, I turn the sound off with terrible characters, terrible dialogue. I think it was an attempt at another work of art. It just didn't work. But what's happening, this is what I see happening. What's scaring me is it's turning into commerce, a commerce of callbacks and best ofs, and we're not going to get films that are works of art anymore. And I also understand that there's a balance here. They can't film as a business. These studios need to be profitable. They need to make money. So you have to balance the auteur's vision with essentially the executives. Well, what the executives think. This should be here and that should be there, and we need to make money, and we're spending this much money, and how much more do you want, and how much is this going to cost? I fully understand that. I have friends who work in the industry who are fairly powerful, who I understand what to the best that I can, what they go through as directors, as producers, as writers. And it's a hell of a time. It is a hell of a time, certainly now, to be in that system, to be working in films and TV or streaming, and to have it be profitable, and but also not knowing where your next gig is going to be. So it's easy to be an armchair critic, and I want to make sure that I am not an armchair critic, because I fully understand to the best of my abilities what this world is. But I can't help feeling that and I guess this is probably all I have to say on this at the moment until we know more. I can't help feeling that the art is leaving for commerce, for what's easy. Yeah, for what's easy and what sells. And Alien has never been that way. But at the same time, I also understand there has to be a balance there. And hopefully they can strike a balance where Fede can make a film that has a lot to say, that it's genuine, that is its own thing, and be artful while also being a big seller. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think I share a lot of the same critiques of Romulus as you do, Jamie. I mean, I was groaning in that theater as my audience was cheering as well with that bit. So I do hope whatever Fede does next isn't overly reliant on nostalgia. But it was encouraging to see his comments on the concept of the AVP concept and his excitement for that. And the idea of a collaborative film between the two, to me, that's exciting. And I think regardless of the AVP movies, yeah, the studio wants to make money with those in the past. That's what they wanted to do, obviously. There was some real art that went into that with what Studio ADI did, with what those production designers did, the worlds they created. A lot of those designs are still looked back to as favorites. So I feel that it should be handled in a way where it's not just a mashup, right? But at the same time, not every Alien project needs to be super highbrow. I mean, I hope Alien Earth goes on for 3-4 seasons for years, and it's well received, and we talk about it for years to come. But you also have movies like Mad Max Fury Road that are just done excellently and just kick ass. And yeah, they have some things to say. You know, I don't want a movie that's completely flat. They have interesting characters and things to talk about and think about. But sometimes you just want a kick ass ride too. And that can be done really well. Just the prospect is exciting to me. I fully understand and your apprehension is completely valid. To me, it's just been so long. And this was such a core part of me getting into this, like both of these. And to Predator being simplistic, yeah, a lot of Predator fans, I think, have that same critique. I mean, Scott Siegler, who wrote the very well-received Aliens Phalanx, he wrote an AVP sequel to Phalanx. And his story starred a Predator ecologist, a female Predator. And Peter Briggs wrote another female Predator-centric story where she was like a social scientist. And so I do, even though hunting is very primary to their culture, they have lots of different clans. There's things to explore there, the different rules, the different tensions between the clans. Some of them don't even hunt humans. So I would like to see more than just, I mean, Prey handled the back to basics and doing something different really well. But it seems like Badlands is going to be a big swing where we're focused on this young Predator protagonist as this underdog. He'll be speaking, he'll be a character in his own, and that alone for Predator is going to be a huge thing that's never been done before. That's very risky. That has me like apprehensive about that, like how that's going to go down. But Alien should never be diluted by Predator. On that, like, I'm in total agreement with you guys. Like, if this happens, I would not want every Alien project forward to have a Predator in it just thrown in, you know? So I think it can happen and not be a drag on Alien.
It's interesting because one day we will look back on this episode and be like, oh, we had no idea what was coming. You know what I mean? This is just, it's one of those things where like part of me loves this moment, you know? I try to, in general, be not apprehensive about things coming out that I don't know about yet, and more kind of optimistic, and to see, I mean, these people are brilliant. Like Fede, to Jamie's point, was working with, literally hundreds of people at the studio, breathing down his neck the entire time, and still turn around a film that I think was largely really, really good. And like, that's an incredibly hard task. I mean, there's literally millions of people in the world who I think could write a really good Alien movie. I really do. I think there's a lot of great, very talented artists out there, great writers out there. There's very few of those people who can actually get it made. You know what I mean? It's just a totally different value proposition, a totally different skill set. And so I just, I always look at it like the people who are put in positions like this are there usually for a reason. If it's not nepotism, it's probably because they're just really talented people. And really talented people have this beautiful benefit of occasionally surprising us. So, if this does end up happening, which again, I do not want it to, but if it does, then, I trust that it would be done by people who are, talented. And hey, if it ends up falling flat in its face, we still have, 7, 8, however many by that point, other movies to, look back on and talk about. But that being said, I mean, time will tell what is actually going to happen with this. I'm really excited for Badlands. I think that looks really cool. And I'm to Adam's point, I'm really excited to see a protagonist, for the first time. I think that's going to be really, really cool. And also to your other points about the comics and things, like a lot of my favorite storylines in the comics, I was telling Jamie about this earlier, go beyond the hunting and go more into like what it means to hunt and what it means to be hunted. And I think there's a lot of kind of gradations within that are very interesting in a Predator movie. But again, it's not an alien. That's not, to me, what an alien film. Alien films should not, in my opinion, be about, hunting and being hunted. That being said, I mean, that is essentially what's happening in Alien. But what's so interesting about Alien is it's on its face, it's supposed to be that. Like, it's supposed to be a cat and mouse game. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's Jaws in a spaceship, etc. But it ends up feeling way stranger than that. And that vibe is like what we've been trying to recapture ever since. This movie that sets it up like it's a monster film, and then the monster is like beautiful for some reason, and you're like, what am I looking at? You know what I mean? Why does it have all these tubules on its back? Like, what is it? Why is it built this way? Those mysteries to me are really important to maintain. And I guess my closing thought would be something that I always go to bat for is keeping the creatures in darkness as much as possible. I don't want to know how they locomote. I don't want to know how they climb. I don't want to see everything. I don't want to know the details of how they maneuver, because to me, it's a lot more frightening when it's ineffable and frightening and mysterious and hard to discern what's exactly going on, because we shouldn't be able to discern these things because they're alien to us, right? So like, if there is an AVP, crossover happening, all I ask is that mystery be maintained and that it not become this, cat and mouse, showdown, Freddy versus Jason, which again, that's a great movie, but like, that to me, that's not obviously not an Alien or a Predator film. I think that there are ways to do it. I hope that they don't happen yet. To Jamie's point, like Rain and Andy clearly are standout characters from Romulus who I would love to see more of their story. I hope if they do crash land on Orgai 6, they don't bump into Daniels cowering from a predator who's like running around the corner. I just don't want that, right? I also got to say, to be honest, I don't want them to land on Orgai 6 either, because one of my main concerns is the small universe problem that so many of these franchises get trapped into, where it's like there's just 2 planets for some reason, and there's just 2 families, and you get the Star Wars issue where it's like, why is everybody related to each other? That being said, I don't know, this comment is all over the place for a closing comment. Rise of Skywalker, for all the complaining that we all do about it, still made well over $1 billion at the box office. So you can hate something, but people are still going to go watch it. And people go to these movies because they are built in these connected universes that are cultivated over many, many years, very gradually. And then you end up with an Avengers Endgame, and half of the world goes to the movies to see what happens. You know what I mean? Disney needs to operate like that to stay, solvent, because of the amount of money that they pump into every aspect of their business model. I hope that Alien doesn't become one of the tentpoles holding the company up, because to your point, Jamie, like, I don't think that that's where great alien storytelling lies. I think it would be wonderful to have Alien exist on like a sub imprint, FX is that essentially, right? Like FX is like it's a kind of a cable, quote unquote, network owned by Disney, via the Hulu mechanism now. So that's nice, right? That gives it a chance to kind of get like ideally slightly lower budgets and more auteur-driven storytelling. And, I think it'd be nice if the movies could be treated like that as well. But then again, you have a movie that makes $350 something million and they want to keep it mainstream. So it's a push and a pull. It's a tug of war. It's an incredibly complicated situation. And we were talking about it, not actually knowing what's going to happen yet. So this could all be for naught, but it is a worthwhile conversation because it says a lot of things about what make these movies special unto themselves and the reasons why we see Predator movies and the reasons why we see Alien films, and how even though because the license was shared, by Dark Horse and 20th Century Fox at the time, like even though they've been pitted against each other quite a lot, was it for the right reasons? And, sometimes maybe it wasn't, sometimes maybe it was. So who's to say what's going to happen? This has been a really fun conversation though.
It has. Thank you, Adam, so much for coming on. I'm sure there's going to be more to talk about once we find out more.
Exciting times. Lots to look forward to.
To find out more information about Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast, please go to www.perfectorganism.com. If you would like to support the show, please go to www.perfectorganism.com/support. Thank you. Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast, is your number one place for all things alien.
With exclusive interviews, fun roundtables, and a whole lot more, Perfect Organism has spent the last decade diving deep into these films we love and know so well.
To find us, go to perfectorganism.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts.